Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us and welcome to this Bluetongue vaccine webinar and Q&A session. My name is Zoe Lloyd. I'm an animal health and welfare scientist at AHDB, and I'm just going to be covering off a few things before handing over to Fiona Lovatt from Flock Health Limited, who will be your chair for this evening. Just to cover off a few housekeeping points, the webinar is being recorded and the link will be sent out to those who have signed up within 24 hours. It will also be uploaded onto YouTube, so you're able to share with anyone who might have missed it to tune in live. There will also be the opportunity at the end to answer questions, so please do put your questions in the chat box. At the end of the webinar, you will get the option to complete a feedback form where you can inform us of questions and topics you're interested in. This really helps us in planning future webinars, so please do fill this in. Please also keep an eye on the Ruminant Health and Welfare and AHDB websites for future webinars. Just to mention before we get started, there is lots of additional support available to you if you are struggling or know of somebody who is. These organisations are also available on the Ruminant Health and Welfare website for you to find out more. And lastly, I would just like to thank all the expert groups involved with bringing this together and for their support. They've all been really vital in this. Right, so without further ado, I will hand over to our chair for this evening, Fiona Lovatt. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Zoe. We've got a huge amount to pack in today, and so I'll be quite brief. I'm just going to say we're going to run the whole webinar on first name terms, and that's to save my embarrassment, not necessarily being able to say the names properly. So apologies if you think that's informal, but that's how we're doing it. So we're going to welcome Gordon, who's the head of exotic disease policy at Defra. Roger, who's representing Syva, and he will also there's also Andrew Connolly from Verbac, who may be able to answer supply issues. Carla from Ceva is going to present, and also Guillaume from Boehringer Ingelheim and Scott Shawned are in the background and may be able to answer supply issues. So without further ado, I'm going to go straight over to Gordon. Just quickly before we do that, we have got a comparison table of all three different vaccines on the same table. We've updated that this week with various marking authority issues, so that's available via the Ruminant Health and Welfare website. But I will hand straight over to Gordon, who will present the current situation from a Defra point of view. Thanks, Gordon.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for inviting me along. Obviously, I speak on behalf of Defra. Policy is devolved and there will be some changes over the coming days and weeks between the different administrations in GB. I'll try and keep it brief because you really want to hear from the experts, i.e. colleagues from vets and from the three companies involved. But as we described at the last time, the restricted zone, which currently covers about half of England, will be moving on the 1st of July to cover the whole of England. And so any animals moving out of England will be subject to the existing controls within the RZ. Really just want to stress that, and we've said this on a number of occasions, vaccination still, in our view, remains the most effective and long-term option for disease control. Obviously, we as government can't advise you in your best interest, so please talk to your private vet to work whether vaccination is right for you. If, however, you do vaccinate, there is a requirement for you to report to us or to Scotland or Wales within 48 hours of that vaccination. And we also encourage private vets also to report where they've prescribed things. So the zone is changing. I think you know that. However, between now and the 1st of July, there is another date, i.e. tomorrow, that you really need to be aware of, particularly if you're moving animals from England into Scotland or Wales from the restricted zone. We're now in a, perhaps next slide, please. We're now in a position where the temperatures are such that there is now a possibility that midges, or should I say, the virus within midges can replicate, and so there's an increasing risk of disease transmission. And so from the 12th of June, i.e. for moves from the 13th of June, then the existing derogations for pre-movement testing to live into Wales and Scotland will be changing, and so pre-movement testing will be required. For movements from the existing RZ into the free areas of England, there are no changes, and the existing measures will continue until midnight on the 30th of June. I think I probably covered the fact that the zone is going to be extended from the 1st of July. So that means that if you farm within England, there will be no need to apply for a specific license or to do any testing for any moves within England. However, any moves out of England from the 1st of July will be subject to pre-movement tests or the regulations that Scottish Government and Welsh Government will set out on their website. In questioning, we can perhaps pick up some of them if you want to try and explore them, although I would say that the regulations for Wales won't be published until tomorrow. There's also some important changes in the validity of those test samples for pre-movement tests. We're now for samples between now and the end of June. Those pre-movement tests are only valid for 10 days. That's 10 calendar days from the date that the sample was taken. And from the 1st of July, that's further reducing to 7 days. So please talk to your private vet if you're taking those samples to make sure that you take them in good time to meet those license requirements. Further information can be found on the Welsh and Scottish Government websites. So what should you do now? Well, if you haven't vaccinated your livestock, please talk to your private vet and work out whether vaccination against Bluetongue 3 or any other available strains is the right thing for you. And that's particularly important, if you're in the RZ now or anywhere in England, because you will still fall within those criteria for moving out of England. Please keep an eye on gov.uk. It's not the most user-friendly website, so alternatively look at the AHDB Ruminant Health and Welfare website. That goes into more information there. And particularly if you move animals into Wales or Scotland, please understand what rules are going to apply. Should also say that even though within England there won't be a requirement to apply for specific licenses, Bluetongue is still a notifiable disease. Please continue to report it. We do need to understand what's going on. We do want to understand what sort of clinical signs, if any, are being seen. You know the numbers to report. They're the normal report numbers for any notifiable disease. But I also just wanted to flag to private veterinary colleagues that from the 1st of July, we'll also be changing the way that report cases for Bluetongue, where only Bluetongue is suspected. So APHA vets will no longer be going out to take those samples, but private vets will be given a code and be authorised to take those diagnostic samples to send straight into Pirbright for diagnostic testing. And I think that's really all I wanted to say. There are some specific changes, particularly in Scotland, where some of those pre-movement test derogations can be waived, where cattle are vaccinated, but you really do need to look at the Scottish Government website to work out whether that applies to you or not. So Fiona, I'll leave it there. Happy to pick up things at the end, perhaps in questioning, but I'm sure you really want to hear from vaccine companies.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Gordon. And people are welcome to send in questions, and Gordon's still going to be around for question time at the end. Thanks, Gordon. So I'm now going to invite Roger, who's a global ruminant marketing manager for Syva. Roger's phoning in from Spain and is going to tell us about some of the work that Syva have been doing with their vaccines. We're nearly there. Roger, can you turn your camera on as well, maybe? That's perfect. You're in presenter mode. Although it was working fine, Roger. Can you go back to presenter mode?
Okay. Thank you for your invitation. And now I will explain what happens with this disease in Europe, and after we'll talk about the Ceva, the efficacy studies in sheep and bovine too. No, the first question is why we are here. No, if you see this map, in the 19th years, the prevalence of this disease in Europe was very low. There was different strains, but all of them were in the south of Europe. Now, if you see this map, it's like a big chaos that how many strains there are in Europe and how many outbreaks from different strains there are in Europe, and is growing a lot in the north of European countries. At this moment, countries like Sweden, like Denmark, they have a big outbreaks of this disease. No, it means that in the future, I am sure that in UK, in Ireland, or the north of Ireland, you will see not only serotype 3s, you will see more serotypes of this disease. And at the same moment, now there are another disease in Spain and France that is a hemorrhagical disease that is growing and is very similar to Bluetongue, and we are convinced that in the coming years we'll arrive at, with the same level in the north of the European countries. Ceva is a company with more than 20 years of experience in this kind of the vector-borne disease, with more than 130 million of doses, and is the first Bluetongue vaccine that we developed in only 8 months. No, and is the quality, efficacy, and safety of the Ceva that is a multi-strain vaccine that we have in Europe. No, and the vaccine is an inactivated full vaccine. The activate substance is isolated in the Netherlands in 2023, and now the authorities of the UK permit you use in cattle and sheep. No, and the full marketing authorization obtained for sheep in north of Ireland at this moment. Cattle is in this indication is in progress. It's based on Ceva, that is an European multi-strain dossier. In sheep, the vaccination scheme is only 1 dose, and after a booster 1 year later. This is the trial that we did in Netherlands, in Leefstad, and it was like a challenge that 20 days later that the first shot. No, we controlled the bacteria, the viremia, the temperature, the rectal temperature, and the clinical signs. At the same moment, the level of the antibodies and then neutralizing antibodies for this serological process. If you see the first screen, you are saying that there are big difference between the placebo group and the group of the vaccination with the mortality, and in the right part, the same with the clinical science lesions. All of them was with different significant difference. This is the screen that we show to the authorities in order to see the difference between the reduction of the clinical science lesions with the placebo group and both groups that we vaccinated. If you see, there are big difference between both groups. And at the same moment, we showed that there are a big reduction of the viremia in the group of placebo and 2 groups with the Ceva-3. It means that in this case, there are the prevention of mortality, a reduction of clinical and science lesions, and a reduction of viremia. Okay, and this study was in Netherlands. Another study in Netherlands was with a collaboration with the Royal GD, one of the most important companies in Europe that are working with in order to organize trials. that we organized a trial with a big number of cows, 15, and we have with 2 applications of the Ceva 3, 1 and 0, and after 21 days later. No, we control the clinical signals, the serological response, and the viremia. All of these animals were negative at the first time that we start the trial. This is very important because during the trial we observed an outbreak of the Bluetongue at the same in the same study. It was very funny situation, but at the end it's like what happened in the field. Not that sometimes we want to use the vaccine and sometimes the outbreak is in the middle. If you see the level of the serology and the PCR, the level of the serology after the outbreak is growing very well in comparison that the animals that the outbreak was before that the start of the onset of immunity. At the same moment, with the level of the serology with the BP7, the animals with the immunity very well, they growing after very well, and with the same with antibodies neutralizing that after the onset of immunity, the level of the antibodies growing very well. It means that the time of infections is very important. It's not the same that when you prevent the disease or when you have in the middle that one outbreak and you want to use the vaccine. In this case, we observed at the same moment the level of the clinical science, and if you see the screen in the left, there are a big difference between the group with an outbreak and the group without outbreak, that is the last part. And the same, the number of or the quality of the fever, salivations, mood lesion, respiration. It means the time of infection is very important. Why I am saying it? Because we have big experience in Netherlands, in other countries, that when you use the vaccines in the middle of the outbreaks, the response is totally different than if you use the vaccine to prevent the disease. Okay. The conclusion, the vaccination with Ceva BTB3 is a very good tool to control the disease in cattle. And after 2 doses, with a 20 days separate, the animals showed a clear response of the BTB3 neutralizing antibody and as well as BTB antibodies. And it's very important that you control very well if there are some outbreaks in the area that you are working or if only to prevent. An example, in Belgium now, the vaccination against hemorrhagical disease, that is a disease very similar to Bluetongue, is without any outbreak. It's before that the disease arrived to the country. It means that they want to block the movement of this disease before, or the split of this disease before to arrive at this country. In this case, we suggest to do the same, is if it's possible to use the vaccine before that the outbreaks. Okay. And all of this material, it's published in the last European Congress in Nantes. And if you want that, we will send the posters and everything, we will send you without any problem. Okay, and if you have some questions.
Brilliant, Roger. That was really very quick.
Sorry, because I have only 10 minutes.
I'm thinking on our questions up to now, we don't have anything specifically for Ceva. Does Andrew want to say anything from a Virbac point of view of supply of Ceva in the UK, what the current situation is and what the future situation is if we have more people wanting to vaccinate? Your microphone's just off at the moment.
Andrew, are you mute?
You're on mute still, Andrew. There you go.
Is that any better?
Yep,
there we
perfect.
go. Thanks, Fiona. We have had a big delivery of Ceva that's been released into the UK market today. So all back orders have been completely cleared and is currently en route to the 3 main veterinary wholesalers. So that's positive in the short term. Beyond that, we do have consistent deliveries scheduled each month, so supply is very good. But we'd encourage vet practices to place the orders with the wholesalers because that encourages the wholesalers to generate an order. And quite often, even if it's out of stock in a wholesaler, it doesn't mean that we necessarily don't have stock. So place the order to generate demand. And obviously always remember that your Virbac territory manager is there and has the most up-to-date supply information. So give them the call and they're happy to advise.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Andrew. There is just one question here, and I think this is specifically to do with Cybazole, and it's a question about what's actually on the claim with respect to viremia in sheep. Can either of you answer? I'm just about to look to the SPC. We can come back to that answer if you want.
Roger, I'll give that one to you.
It's the reduction of the viremia in the SPC.
Yes. Can you tell us about how the challenge studies have shown whether the vaccine reduces viremia or prevents it?
Could you repeat the question? Sorry.
So the question's quite brief, actually, but the question is, how does the vaccine affect when the animal is challenged? How does it affect viremia in the sheep?
When the animal is negative and after you use the vaccine in order to prevent the disease.
Yes.
And to reduce the viremia when it's now, if this question is very difficult because remember that this is an emergency vaccine that we are using only some years, only less than 2 years in Europe, and we don't have a big studies about it, no? But the same for all the pharmaceutical companies. We are saying that when we use the vaccine, there are a reduction of the viremia in the first 6 months after the application. But when we will see the duration of the immunity, I suppose that in less than 6 months, we will have all the trials in order to control the duration of the immunity of this disease, or this vaccine.
Okay, brilliant. Actually, there, Roger, you answered the next question, which was very good, about available data on the duration of immunity. So you're confident that you've got the 6 months duration. You're confident about.
Remember that this is an emergency registration, and it's every year we are doing all the trials. At this moment, we have 2 trials. One for, I think that the duration of immunity for 6 months, that the result runs very well. But at the same moment, we are doing another trial in order to show that the duration of immunity will be 12 months, 1 year. I suppose that these trials will be okay for all the world. In less than 6 months, we will have the option to send the results of these trials to the authorities.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So I think that answers that question quite nicely. Thanks, Roger. And thank you, Andrew. I'm afraid we're going to have to move on. We're quite brutal here, but we might need you back. We're asking questions at the end, so please don't go away. But thank you. Turn your cameras off. And so I need to turn to Carla. Carla's joined us from France, and she's representing Syva. Carla is the Ruminant Franchise Director for Europe for Syva. And I'll hand over to you. Thanks, Carla.
Thank you, Fiona. Let me say that it's a pleasure to be here, and I thank the organization for the invitation that was done to Syva to be present and the opportunity to participate. As a company, we are committed to make available vaccines for veterinarians and for farmers to prevent and to protect ruminants against the new emergent vector-borne diseases. So in the beginning of this year, we have received from the European Medicine Agency the marketing authorization under exceptional circumstances for 2 vaccines, one for epizootic hemorrhagic disease, and the other one, which is the topic that we are addressing today, which is the Bluetongue virus serotype 3 for the prevention of BTV3. So I will ask to change the slide for the next slide. Not going too much, I'll do a brief overview. I will be available to take any questions that are necessary, but an overview of the vaccine, but also of the marketing authorization status. In February 2025, we received from the European Medicine Agency the approval under the Article 25 for Bulvac 3, and we received afterwards the approval for Great Britain from the Veterinary Medicine Directorate. So this is important because when you have an European-wide authorization by the European Medicine Agency, it also means that you automatically the product will be registered across all the European Union countries, and also that all the dossier has been reviewed and validated by the European Medicine Agency. So moving to the next slide, when we speak about Bluevac in terms of Bluevac 3 in terms of composition of the vaccine, we are speaking about a vaccine that contains an inactivated form of the viruses. This is important because obviously it cannot cause the disease, so highly safe. And on the other side, it elicits an immune response in the animals that offer protection. The vaccine Bluevac 3 it's adjuvanted, so it contains an adjuvant with a high safety profile, so a conjugation of aluminum hydroxide and purified saponin, which also stimulates the immune response together with the antigen. Moving forward to the next slide, the vaccine has been approved by the European Medicine Agency to be used and to protect both cattle and sheep against BTV3 in terms of target species. And this obviously is important because it's part of the claim that we have to use and to be used on both species. In terms of vaccination protocol, it is a ready-to-use injectable suspension, so no need for reconstitution. It can be used safely from 2 months of age. The dose is 2 milliliters in sheep and 4 milliliters in cattle, and it is to be used by subcutaneous route. 2 doses, the protocol are 2 doses with 3 weeks apart, so it's important to do this primary vaccination in order to be able to have the onset of immunity that will take 21 days after the completion of the primary vaccination. This is obviously important to be able to protect the animal. Same as the other vaccines, the duration of immunity is not established. When we are facing, as in the case of BTV3 or in the case of epizootic hemorrhagic disease, when we are facing an emergency where a solution needs to come to the market, first there's an authorization for emergency use, then, which is the step where we are now, is an authorization by the European Medicine Agency under Article 25 for exceptional circumstances. And during this process, we are allowed to provide the studies on duration of immunity that will come afterwards. So there obviously a duration of immunity takes the time that we measure that duration. So it will come afterwards and it will be presented to the European authorities for the approval. Our recommendation is these are vaccines that have been used in the market for a long time for other serotypes. So the recommendations and the experience tell us that we expect the duration of immunity on the same level as the other serotypes that are there. One important point also is the experience that we have in the field, either for epizootic hemorrhagic disease, either for Bluetongue virus serotype 3, is the high safety profile, which is very important, the high safety profile on the animals. So a conjugation of efficacy, which is important, and particularly also important, the reduction of viremia. That will be what will limit the spread of the disease when we speak about the disease which is transmitted by a vector, which is just arriving with a warm season. So this is key, but it's also important to have a high safety profile on the animals because obviously it's a type of vaccination which is used across in a large scale and in mass vaccination regimes. So these are the key points from my side. I'm available to take any question that goes more deeply into any point. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks. Thank you, Carla. Thank you very much. Can you tell us something about the supply and availability of Bluevac in the UK at the moment and in the next few months?
Yes, for sure. So our vaccine will be available. The expectation is that it will be available on late summer. At this moment, we are not in conditions to provide you an accurate date. in June, because obviously there are different milestones regarding the release of the product and along the formulation. But our expectation is that supply will arrive to UK in late summer for Bluetongue 3.
Brilliant. Thank you. I don't think we currently have any specific Bluetongue questions that have come in. So what I think I'll do, it in the interest of time, I think I might go on to Guillaume, and then, but please be around, Carla. It takes people a while.
Yes.
It takes me a while to put the questions in. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Guillaume, welcome. Thank you for joining us. So Guillaume's joined us from France, and he's going to tell us about Bluetongue. Thanks, Guillaume.
Yeah, so merci, Fiona. I just have two slides about the vaccine itself, but I will stress a little bit the points that are, I would say, the main drivers of the development of this vaccine. So next slide. I think it's super important to, you can go to the next slide. Yeah, I think it's super important to go back to the structure of the virus, which is a virus with RNA, so a faculty to mutate quite easily, and also a virus that contains different segments. And the main problem we could face with this kind of virus is when you have one cell which is co-infected by two different viruses, you can have a reassortment of the different pieces of genome, and you can get a new virus. There is one segment which is very well known, the number 2, which is responsible for the serotype, but you have some segments that are responsible for the pathogenicity of the virus. So you may have, within the same serotypes, some very pathogenic, I would say, strains and some low pathogenic ones. There are some segments that are also involved in how the virus interfere with the midges. Some viruses are adapted to some groups of midges, some to other groups. That makes the epidemiology dependent and dependent on, I would say, the repartition of the midges. But we don't know very well what segment is involved in this kind of thing. What we know it is that today in Europe, we have two serotypes that are very well adapted to the vectors in the north, serotype 8 and serotype 3. And we are likely to see in the UK, I would say, the development and the circulation of these serotypes. But nobody knows if a serotype 1 or a serotype 4 circulating in Southern Europe, in contact, co-infecting a cell with a BTV8 or a BTV3, could change his, I would say, pathogenic patterns or transmission patterns and could adapt to the UK in the future. So it's a little bit what we are considering when we develop this kind of vaccines. Next slide. The other point which is super important for you when you have animals that are, I would say, sensitive to these viruses is can we predict the spread of a given serotype when it circulates somewhere? When we know what are the midges subspecies or species that are responsible for the transmission, we can predict a little bit with, for example, a wind dispersal model, how it will circulate, how it will spread. And generally, for example, in the case of BTV3, we saw that the patterns were very close to what happened with the BTV8. And I would say it was not that difficult to predict it would arrive in the UK. You can go to the next slide. And what we know also, it is the seasonality of the disease. It was, I would say, mentioned by Gordon previously. In the first half of the year, you don't have transmission. I mean, animals that were sick in the last season today are in, I would say, not sick anymore, but you may have some calves that will born viremic and that will contaminate midges. So let spring occur, let's let the midges population grow, and I would say at the end of June, generally, you have a wonderful midges population. You have a few viremic calves, so these midges can grab some viruses and are ready to transmit. And it is not by chance that we see a significant increase of BTV outbreaks from July, and it's probably what we'll expect in the UK as in the rest of Europe from July this year. Next slide. It's interesting also to see that outbreaks are quite unpredictable, but generally when you have one serotypes that start to circulate, it makes a wave, an epidemic wave that lasts 3 years. Roughly, you have each year, considering even you have no vaccine available, each year you have 30% of the susceptible animals that are transmitted the disease by midges. So the first year, you will have 30% of animals that will be survivors and, I would say, immune against the disease. So the next year, you still have 60% of animals that are susceptible to the disease. So you will let the disease occur, and still you will have a wave of BTV the second year. But you will have, at the end of this period, maybe 50, 60% of the population that will be immune. So it left some room for the infection to carry on the third year. And typically, we have this kind of wave that lasts 3 years, and after that, it's more calm during, I would say, 3, 4, 5 years. It depends the average immunity of animals. So it's important to consider in the UK, your year one for BTV was last year, and it's wise to get as soon as possible a herd immunity by vaccinating the animals, not waiting them to be infected naturally, because we know that BTV3 is highly pathogenic. In the Netherlands, the mortality rate was about 70% on sheep, 2-3% on cattle, with severe decrease in milk production. So it's better to vaccinate when you are at the beginning of the outbreak and to reach very quickly this herd immunity that, I would say, blocks the further development of the outbreak. You can go to the next slide. So next slide, I mentioned this impact, and it was seen. Just to stress a little bit this notion of BTV waves, and in Europe you can see in blue the waves of BTV8. The first wave was 2006, 2010, 2009, I would say. And after that, you see this period that was very calm from 2009, 2010 till 2014, and a wave again starting in 2015, and I would say significant decrease with calm situation from 2014. And now we have, since I would say late August 24 in continental Europe, the emergence of a new BTV8 outbreak. So we predict that we will have the co-circulation of BTV3, BTV8 next year in Europe, and maybe UK at risk of BTV8. I know today you are safe regarding this serotype, but we can perfectly imagine a co-circulation from next year with BTV3 and BTV8 in the UK. Next slide, please. There is also a point which is interesting in your position in the UK, because you have BTV3, it was detected, you had some sick animal, but the clinical incidence was significantly different, and I would say less severe than what was observed in the Netherlands and continental Europe. And I mean, you don't have a different BTV3 strain which is circulating in the UK. You have the original one coming from the Netherlands, and there was no possibility of reassortment with other BTV serotypes would have circulated, that could have circulated in the same time. You have just this BTV3 serotype. The point is that we have observed in different countries, and particularly in Italy, the more you have ruminants which are viremic, the more you have midges that contaminate. And when animals are massively, I would say, contaminated by a lot of midges bites, when the initial load of virus which is transmitted to these animals is very important, you are more likely to have very severe clinical signs at individual level. And this is particularly true when you are in an area where you have the coexistence of two ruminant populations. You know that sheep are very sensitive to the BTV, but the viremia on sheep don't last a long time, roughly 2 weeks. But in the same time, you have cattle. Cattle, they are not that sick with BTV, or I would say less than sheep. But the viremia on cattle is longer than on sheep, maybe something like 6 weeks. And the point is that the hair on cattle is quite thin compared to the sheep. So it's much easier for midges to grab virus on cattle than to contaminate on sheep. And classically, if you have many cattle which are viremic, you are very likely to have a very severe expansion of the outbreak on sheep. So the vaccination of cattle is essential, is extremely important if we want to prevent the viremia, and if we want to by prevention of viremia, if we want to minimize the spread of the outbreak, and if we want to minimize also globally the severity of the outbreak. Next slide. So I will go very quickly on the efficacy studies we did for Bultavos 3 on sheep and on cattle. When we tested on sheep, we tested three groups of vaccinated animals. Some animals that were vaccinated with the standard commercial dose, some others that were vaccinated at the minimum, I would say, acceptable dose at the end of the shelf life of our BTV vaccines, and at a very low dose, which is 50 times lower than the commercial dose. What we have seen, it is that the clinical protection on sheep, whatever the titer of these three groups, the clinical protection was perfect. We had no clinical signs, even on the group that was vaccinated with a vaccine 50 times titer, 50 times lower than the commercial one. So it's an important point. There was no local reaction or general reaction seen after the vaccination of these animals. And when we did the challenge was done with the pathogenic strain from the Netherlands. There was no hyperthermia on the vaccinated animals, but there was hyperthermia on the control group. The challenge on the control was severe. There was mortality on sheep that were from the control group. And regarding the prevention of the viremia, we had the prevention of the viremia on the group that was vaccinated with the standard commercial dose, but we had a reduction of the viremia, so a significant decrease in the number of virus detected post-challenge, but just a prevention of the viremia on animals that were vaccinated with the low titer vaccine, titer at the end of the shelf life, or the super low titer 50 times lower than the commercial one. So it was a good result. The last slide, please. On cattle, we did challenge, we vaccinated cattle also. Efficacy was assessed and was very good on cattle. We can provide you this data. There was no clinical signs on vaccinated animals from different groups vaccinated with different batches of vaccine. These animals were vaccinated at the low antigenic dose. I mean, what the minimum acceptable titer of vaccine at the end of the shelf life of the vaccine. There was no hyperthermia post-challenge. There was no clinical signs, and there was no viremia. So total prevention of clinical signs, viremia, and hyperthermia post-challenge with the vaccination. This is a super important asset because, as I told you, prevention of viremia on cattle is key to minimize the spread of the virus through the ruminant population. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thanks, Guillaume. That's really.
I just, there was an additional slide. If you have more questions, don't hesitate to reach out my colleagues in the UK. And there is a study that was released by the Friedrich Loeffler Institute in Germany regarding BTV3 vaccines. And I strongly encourage you to refer to this study if you need some translation of it. We can provide you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guillaume, for that. Brilliant. So I think we probably need Sinead and Scott to just very quickly tell us about supply of Voltavo in the UK currently and in the next few months.
Yep, no problem at all. So firstly, we're delighted to already have the provisional marketing authorisation for Voltavo 3 for cattle and sheep. And in terms of stock, we just cleared a very large number of back orders, and I believe there's stock in the wholesalers beyond that as well. We also have a large number of doses in the country as well, so that to replenish the wholesalers as and when that's needed. And we have multiple deliveries arriving each month of doses of Voltavo 3. So we're obviously it's good news. So we've caught up and have more stock available.
Okay, that's great. I think so. I'm just going to ask everybody to turn their cameras on. So we have a huge number of questions here that we need to rattle through. Just in terms of that for supply issues, I think we do really want to stress that vets encourage their farmers to put orders in. That's across the board, isn't it? We want to make sure we know who wants what, and that we can, as far as possible, predict supply. So I think that's an important thing to mention. One of the where do we start with all these questions? Some are quite specific, but in terms of with vaccines, so both in bulls and tups, is there a recommended duration to avoid use before tupping or bulling in the use of the vaccine? This, I don't know if anyone on the call wants to specifically answer that. Otherwise,
I didn't catch the question.
So in terms of using before breeding.
Inactivated vaccines, there is no residual pathogenicity of the virus. If the vaccine is well tolerated, if you don't see significant level of hyperthermia, there is no specific issue to be expected regarding pregnancy or these kind of things.
And actually, Guillaume, that's a really helpful point. I certainly know there have been rumours going around about vaccine causing infertility, and as far as I'm aware, and people on the call might be, I don't think there is any evidence, and the virologists have told us there is no evidence, as far as I'm aware, of the vaccines causing problems with infertility. On the contrary, I think probably our European colleagues could tell us that there's a lot of evidence of animals who have faced active disease then being infertile. That worries me far more.
Yeah. Can I come in there quickly?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Just to reiterate that what was just said about the risks from disease are far greater than the risks from vaccines. We're dealing with killed vaccines. Remember, we had similar issues or rumours after BTV8 outbreak and extensive use of vaccine, and there was no evidence at all of the vaccine causing issues. There will be issues with handling animals, and there will be issues that are pregnant, and there will be issues with vaccinating pregnant animals, just because of the fact, physical fact of handling the animals, and that's likely to be a factor. But just to stress that the impact of all of this is much less than the potential impact of the disease, and the key thing is for vets to have dialogues with their farmers to work out what animals need to be done and when. Thanks.
Thanks, Gareth.
Yeah, a point regarding this also, I know that in Netherlands there will be some studies that will compare farms that vaccinated and farms that did not vaccinate to assess the performance in reproduction. It will be probably released in a few months, and we see clearly the benefit of vaccination. And don't forget that a big aspect of the pathogenicity of BTV3 is on reproduction. And of course, when we vaccinate during a period the outbreak is ongoing, you see abortions, you see losses in fertility, which are due to the circulation of the virus.
Thanks,
in this case, Fiona, I want to say that in Spain, you know that for sheep, we have a big cooperative, very professionality. And if you need or you want some contact for one of these cooperative, we will send you in order to talk directly with the veterinarian, because this is a rumor that is not right. It's a rumor without any expectation. It's as Guillaume is saying to you before. If you want this contact from Spain, we will help you in order to understand that this is only a rumor that is not right.
And that's specifically, Roger, you're talking about vaccines affecting fertility. Yes.
Yes, because in this cooperative we are using this vaccine for the last times, and we are saying that doesn't exist any problem in this way.
Yeah. So just to reiterate, it's an unfounded rumor. Thank you for that, Roger. There is a question here that does any of the companies have information regarding using the Bluetongue vaccination at the same time as other vaccines, specifically say abortion in sheep, or not? I mean, we've been saying do not use Bluetongue vaccine at the same time as any other vaccination. Is that correct advice?
Maybe I can take that one. We currently, maybe I can take that one. Obviously, this is at the discretion of the veterinarian. What we have done in France, because in France, besides BTV, you also have epizootic hemorrhagic disease. So there's an ongoing trial with the administration to understand the administration at the same time, in the same moment, of vaccine for epizootic hemorrhagic disease and vaccines for BTV3. There was no interference at all. So this information was important because it was being requested by the veterinarians, by the field. Another point also, which I think it's important, currently there's already a mandatory eradication program in Belgium where you have 3 vaccinations being applied, so 3 different vaccines being applied, epizootic hemorrhagic disease and 2 strains of BTV3. Again, the information we get from the field is that there is no interference. As a pharmaceutical company, obviously for us, it's important to respect what we have in the SPC, but that study has been done together with universities from France, and it will be available very soon for veterinarians and for the community to be aware of it. But the experience is that there is no interference between the 2 vaccines. Again, I'm speaking here about epizootic hemorrhagic disease and BTV.
In the Fiona, in the south of European countries with cattle, there are some veterinarians that are using BTV vaccines and IVR vaccines, and doesn't exist any interference. There doesn't exist any problem, because we know that a lot of customers are using this kind of the management.
Okay.
Without any interference.
Yeah, there is just one precision I want to stress. When we use the same day different vaccine, the essential point is never to mix the vaccine, 2 different vaccines in the same syringe. We will never repeat that enough. It's super important. Sometimes you can inject at 2 separate points, but never mix the vaccine.
Never mix it. No. Yeah.
I think it's useful, sorry Fiona, it's useful to note as well that it isn't contraindicated to use vaccines at the same time. It doesn't constitute off-label use, but it's very much at the discretion of the prescribing vet based on the disease picture on farm.
Yeah. Thank you, Sinead. Thank you. Okay, I have a specific question here for Boltavo. Let's just start with this. Is the advice still a single dose in sheep, or is anyone advising 2 doses 3 weeks apart? And that's probably best to come from Guillaume, maybe, or Sinead.
Alors, what we have when we vaccinate sheep with 1 dose, we have a good protection. So the official recommendation is a 1-shot protocol on sheep. But the serological studies that were performed by the Friedrich Loeffler Institute show that if we vaccinate with 2 shots, we have a significant increase of the antibodies, protective antibodies level. So animals, I would say, are more than protected.
Okay, just to clarify, Guillaume, are you saying there that 2 shots are better, or are you saying that 1 shot is enough? Sorry to be pedantic.
Officially, I have to stick to the species, so I would say 1 shot is enough. But I mean, regarding the studies we have not performed, but that come from the FLI, I would say having 2 shots could be relevant if we want to have a super long duration of immunity, for example. Today, we don't have yet the duration of immunity studies which are validated. They should arrive as our colleagues in something like 6 months to validate 1 year duration of immunity. So today we are still with this one shot vaccination protocol, but I would say
okay,
protection is good.
Okay, no, that is really helpful. That is really helpful. Can we just so I've seen you present this before, and because people talk all the time about the Bluetongue vaccines not being perfect, that doesn't mean if you have an animal that has been vaccinated once with Boltava, you would expect that animal not to show clinical signs if it then faced disease.
Yeah.
Is everyone saying that if we see signs in a vaccinated animal, that's a yellow card situation, i.e. lack of efficacy, to be reported?
Absolutely. If an animal which is vaccinated displays clinical signs, it should be reported to pharmacovigilance. So we encourage all the vets who see vaccinated displaying clinical signs to report the cases. We are very serious in that, and I would say this is the way we detected BTV12 in the Netherlands. There were some clinical signs that were detected on animals that were vaccinated with Bultavo. So it was strange because we are not used to see that, and it was BTV12. We have no report of lack of efficacy regarding the protection against BTV3. Of course, BTV3 vaccine don't protect against other serotypes.
Okay, no, I think that is really helpful because there's a lot of rumours that we know that the vaccine doesn't stop 100% stop disease, but in an individual animal, if it's vaccinated, we expect it to be protected. Thank you, that's helpful. There's a very specific question here for Cybersol, Roger, that you may be able to answer. So it's could we confirm about the challenge studies that you've done? And I know this is wrong because I've seen other challenge. You haven't presented all your challenge studies there, have you? You've got further studies. It says it's not just those 9 sheep that you've tested it in. You've had further studies looking at your challenge.
Yes, we did. In order to register all the vaccines, we need to produce challenge in everything, and we are working this way. Remember that this is all of these 3 vaccines are emergency vaccines. It's the same and the similar than the COVID vaccines before in human health. And now we are doing the first steps in order to register the products and to register the challenge and everything. And in the next steps, we will send the same than the rest of the companies more trials in order to protect more the species and all the registration program.
There was a very interesting thing, Roger, that you didn't include about the breeds of sheep in your challenge studies. You did see a difference in breed mortality, didn't you? That might be worth just mentioning.
In the mortality, we provoked the challenge with one of the more severity strains that there are now, and in the group that doesn't exist, on the group placebo, all the animals were died less than 21 days, and the group that we vaccinate, only one diet. But in this case, we see that there's another problems like a parasites that we saw very well. That maybe the reason that this animal diet is not for the vaccine, is for the parasites. Remember that in the meeting that we say before with the research department, we talk about it. No? But the vaccine, in this case, the challenge, the group, the vaccine, the mortality was 0.
Yeah. So in your control groups, you saw high mortalities in certain age and breeds, potentially more than others.
Yes.
It could be better. Thank you. There's a question here specifically about Bluevac. Does Carla have any information on the efficacy of Bluevac and the results of any trials that you've undertaken with Bluevac?
Yes, of course. So in order for us to submit and be approved by the European Medicine Agency, the challenge studies have to be performed and made. What we have done as the other vaccines was to evaluate viremia on one side, was to evaluate the serological response, and also to evaluate the clinical signs. Studies were done with lambs and with the cows. As per the normal procedure. What we have found on small ruminants and on the lambs was that we were able to reduce clinical signs, we were able to reduce the global clinical score, and we were also able to reduce viremia and mortality on the animals. In terms of evaluation in cattle, the results that we have found were significant. All the results are obviously statistical significant, but was a statistical significance in terms of reduction of viremia. There was the challenge was mostly mild in terms of clinical signs in cattle, so it was not possible there to find the statistical significance. And there we have the reduction in terms of viremia for our vaccine.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Carla. There's a question here. I think this might be again. How can we establish a duration of immunity if the claim is related to reduced viremia and not a sterile immunity? Does anyone want to answer that question? I think it's slightly related.
I could say
Go on,
maybe. Yeah, I could say the question is a little bit tricky. What was mentioned by Roger is right. I mean, we were in an emergency process, so the evaluation of the efficacy of the vaccine was done 1 month after the vaccination. So at the moment we are at the peak of the immunity. What we know it is that the immunity against BTV don't decrease so fast. We have a kind of plateau after the vaccination. So I would say the level of antibodies and the protection is expected to last quite a long time, more than 1 year. It is what happens with the other serotypes, and there is no reason it would be different for the serotype 3. So today, the studies we present regarding the prevention of the viremia are made 1 month after the vaccination. We don't have the precise results of this outcome 6 months or 1 year after the vaccination. I think these studies will arrive later on. What is important to see now, most of vaccines are in the field in Europe for more than 1 year. It's to follow the pharmacovigilance, to report the pharmacovigilance, and to analyze any case of lack of efficacy, because in this case, of course, we'll see viremia, we'll see these kind of things. But today, I would say, we don't have.
Fiona, one question about the Guillaume answer. I totally agree with his answer, but remember that there are preclinical trials and clinical trials. The preclinical trials, all of us showed that as Guillaume said, the curve of the level of the antibody decreased a lot after the first challenge. It means that in the preclinical trials, we can show that they reduce the viremia. Another thing is the duration of the immunity. It's totally different. It's that how many times it's the level of the antibodies you will have in the blood. That is that now Guillaume and Carla are saying all of us, that now we are doing all these trials in order to say when or how many times we will see this duration of the immunity, because we don't know if it will arrive 7, 8, 9, or 10 months. At this moment, it's impossible. Our expectation is that the duration of the immunity will arrive 1 year, but we will need to finalize all the studies about it. But it's totally different, the duration of the immunity and the reduction of the viremia in this way.
Yeah, I can only reinforce. Sorry, Guillaume. I was going to say I can only reinforce what my colleagues already said. These are two different things: viremia and duration of immunity. Right now, we are speaking about the norovirus. We have several vaccines in the market for this virus and for other serotypes. So our conviction is that we will be at the same level as as it was from the previous experience. There is no reason to believe that that is not the case. In any case, it is mandatory, in our case, that we have a centralized procedure, that we provide this information to the European Medicine Agency in due term, and that is the work that is being done.
And as Carla is saying, for you, for UK, the serotype 3 is the first serotype that to arrive. Here in Spain, we have vaccines against serotype 4, serotype 8. That the last 20 years we are working in this kind of the vaccines. And as Carla is saying, the duration of the immunity of this kind of the vaccines is more or less 1 year. It means that we suspect that for serotype 3 will arrive at the same level of the duration of the immunity.
Okay, so we're extrapolating data from the other BTVs.
Yes, but
Guillaume.
Yeah, I just wanted to stress something regarding the trials we present, the laboratory trials to assess the efficacy of the vaccine. I think it's important in the case of vector-borne disease to consider that laboratory trials don't reflect perfectly the reality of a natural infection. When we make challenges on animals, we inject the virus, but we don't inject in the same time some midges saliva components that enhance the performance of the virus to induce an infection. And the quantity of viruses injected by midges is not much, but you have in midges saliva some pro-infectious factors that make the infection performing super well. This is very difficult in the case of BTV to make very severe infection on animals when we challenge these animals just with the BTV virus. But we don't know how to reproduce perfectly the natural condition of the infection. And it was what was mentioned by Carla on cattle. Typically, it's quite difficult to see clinical signs on the control group. So, of course, we make all these results are made in laboratory control conditions where we cannot reproduce the infection by midges transmission. It is injected, the virus is injected with a needle, and it doesn't reproduce the same thing that what happens in reality. So we have an approach of the challenge, but we don't mimic exactly the challenges that we have in the field.
Okay, thank you. So just to round up on this, there are a number of questions saying, when do people expect that we need to boost vaccines? And I'm gathering from what you've all said, we don't definitely know, but we're thinking about a year. Is that correct assumption? Or we've got 3 or 4 different questions. What are we telling people when they might have to boost? Or are we not able to say that at the moment? Anyone?
For me, we have to consider the practical management of animals. When animals are in the farms in winter or before they are in the field, they are difficult to catch. I think this is the best moment to vaccinate. Of course, vaccinated in the middle of the outbreak is really not the best because you will vaccinate some animals that are already, I would say, sick or incubating the disease, and after that will be confused with the efficacy of the vaccine. So it's better to vaccinate before the season, and of course the boosters normally it will be confirmed soon, but should be 1 year, because regarding the different serotypes we have experience with, yearly boosters are required, and it works well.
100%.
Sorry, Carla. In this case, I fully agree with Guillaume, but I suggest, in order to know when is the best moment to use the vaccine, is that to grow the knowledge in the culicoides movements, because the culicoides are totally different than the typical mosquitoes. And we are saying in all European countries that it's very important, in order to control everything around the vaccination, is in which way the culicoides are moving in your country, because sometimes it's different in France or it's different in Sweden because the environment or the weather is totally different and the culicoides are totally different too. No? No, the culicoides are the same species, but the movement and the management is totally different. No? And this is a suggestion, no? Because I think that in Spain and in France or in Belgium, one of the things that we are doing is that to increase the knowledge with this kind of the movements of the culicoides. Okay.
Thanks, Roger. Carla?
Yeah, from my side, just very much aligned with what Guillaume was mentioning. We can speak about also the experience of what the authorities are recommending. Is the case in France, is the case in Belgium in terms of in the case of Belgium in terms of mandatory programs. And basically, the advice is always to vaccinate before the mosquito season arrives. This is a vector-borne disease. It means we have a season, and the season is just around the corner. So we need to vaccinate before to have the animals. We have spoken about the onset of immunity. Onset of immunity means when the animals are protected. We need to respect that. You cannot expect to vaccinate an animal and immediately protect them. So we need to vaccinate before. And then what is advised by the authorities. So in the case of Belgium, for instance, they were asked to vaccinate the animals until June, when the warm season is coming. And then the recommendation is that to vaccinate next year ahead of the season. So I think here, because we have a seasonality, it's probably easier, I would say, to plan the vaccination when we are in this situation, because we know exactly when the risk period is coming. It's not a disease that will come, or it will obviously have cases, and you will have cases along the year, but you have a specific seasonality that you can plan the vaccination.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. I'm well aware that we've gone quite over time, and there have been a few questions but I think, Gordon, you've answered those questions directly about moving. So if we had to summarize, I'm quite sure everyone on the call would say vaccinate as soon as possible and get it done. Gareth, there's a certain amount of concern about people apparently not able to vaccinate cattle because of the state of their breeding cycle and stuff, but the encouragement is, and you might want to jump in here, Gareth, the encouragement is for vets to be speaking with farmers and to be a bit nuanced about it. If it's a small group of cattle, to get whatever can be vaccinated and do it in as whatever way as possible.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I mean, the key thing issue that we've got at the moment is that as well as all the things that Guillaume was describing, in the UK, there are two additional factors. One is that most of the animals in England are towards the west. The animal density goes up significantly. That will have an impact on the potential development of disease as the extrinsic incubation period kicks off. The other thing is that we are extending our RZ to include the whole of England. So that means that animal movements will be free. So animals can move and take the disease with them, as well as the midges move. That means that there's a lot more animals that are potentially at risk. So the advice really is to get on and vaccinate as soon as possible. There are particular animals that might be at slightly greater risk of issues, more not to do with the specifics of Bluetongue, but any killed vaccine. And those are in the cattle world. Those would be animals which are in the pre-implantation phase. So try and avoid doing it in animals that are in the early stage of pregnancy. Beyond that, look at the groups of animals on the farm. If you've got sheep and cattle, please don't forget the cattle. As we've heard, cattle are big amplifiers of disease. They're big. They produce a lot of CO2. The midges are attracted to them. They produce a lot of viremia, a lot of virus to help the spread of disease. So if you've got multi-species, make sure you do the cattle as well. So our advice is yes, there are the risk is there. It's small compared with the potential risk of Bluetongue. Get on and do it, and look at the groups. Have that conversation with your between vet and farmer to decide what animals need to be done when. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks, Gareth. I do think we should wrap this up. One thing that we haven't mentioned, and I know people so we will be running a webinar with particularly the situation with Wales and Scotland, probably the next webinar. But we do know the situation with Scotland, and something that is very relevant. If people want to move cattle into Scotland, they don't need a pre-movement test if it's 3 weeks after the cow has completed the full course of Bull-Tarvo. That's just something that vets and farmers need to know, that it's very specific, that it's only the Bull-Tarvo vaccine that allows not a pre-movement test into Scotland. That's correct, isn't it, Gordon, Gareth? I think so. It's quite an important detail there if you're moving into Scotland. And otherwise, tomorrow, Wales will hopefully announce the situation with Wales tomorrow, and there will be another webinar organised. We really have run over, and apologies for that. Thank you so much to absolutely everyone. Really, really valuable input from all of you. I really appreciate it, from every single one of the people involved, and also for everyone for all the questions. And I'm sorry if your question wasn't answered. I apologise. There are a lot there. But can I just thank especially Carla and Guillaume and Roger, but all of you, and Gordon, of course, but everybody, thank you very much.
Merci à tous.
Thanks, Fiona. Thanks, everyone.